The dying light of day cast long shadows across Desert Horizon gas station as Mason Reynolds wiped grease from his weathered hands. The radio crackled warnings of an approaching sandstorm before falling silent, leaving only the howl of desert wind. That's when he heard a sound impossible in this desolation. A baby crying. Mason squinted into the darkness beyond his flickering neon sign. A shape emerged from swirling sand, a large German shepherd, limping badly, fur matted with blood. In its jaws, impossibly, it carried a blanket-wrapped infant. "Dear God," Mason whispered as the dog collapsed at his feet, still carefully cradling the crying baby. The dog's eyes intelligent, desperate, locked onto Mason's. Blood pooled beneath its body. Mason reached for the whimpering infant and froze. Pinned to the blanket was a blood-smeared note, and beneath it, a photo that made his heart stop. He knew this dog, and he knew exactly whose baby this was. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Mason Reynolds hadn't always been a gas station owner in the middle of nowhere. 58 years had weathered his face like the surrounding desert landscape, deep lines telling stories of a harder life than this quiet existence. 8 years as sheriff of Elko County had left him with a bad knee, a distrust of strangers, and nightmares that still woke him at 3 a.m. The Desert Horizon, gas station last stop for 60 miles in any direction, had been his refuge after everything fell apart. The station itself was a relic from the 1950s faded turquoise paint, a single row of pumps, and a small convenience store stocked with essentials. Behind the main building sat Mason's living quarters, sparse but functional, and a garage where he fixed the occasional broken-down vehicle. Most days, he'd see 3 or 4 customers. Some days, none at all. And that was exactly how he preferred it. The Blackwoods weren't supposed to enter his life. Ethan Blackwood, 32, former Army intelligence with haunted eyes that reminded Mason too much of his own reflection. Mason had met him exactly once, when Ethan and his wife Sarah had stopped for gas 8 months ago. Sarah had been heavily pregnant then, quiet but watchful, her hand protectively over her belly. Mason remembered how Ranger, their German shepherd, had sat at attention in the back seat, too well trained to be an ordinary family pet. "Beautiful country out here," Ethan had commented, paying cash for his gas. "Beautiful and harsh," Mason had replied. "Not a place for the unprepared." Something in Ethan's eyes had shifted, then a moment of recognition between men who understood danger. They'd exchanged a few more words about the weather, the isolated location, nothing that should have stuck in Mason's memory. But it had. Now, here was Ranger, the same distinctive scar above his right eye, half dead on Mason's doorstep. And the baby Emma, if he recalled correctly from the birth announcement in the Elko County Register, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket, her cries weakening by the second. Sheriff Donna Wallace would tell him to call it in immediately. His former protege would follow protocol, bring in county resources. But the note pinned to Emma's blanket said otherwise. "Trust no one. They've found us." Mason knew about trust, and he knew about betrayal. The question was which would cost more lives tonight. 3 weeks earlier, the Blackwood family home had been filled with laughter. Their modest ranch house, set back from the road and surrounded by aspens, had been Ethan's project since leaving the military 2 years ago. Each weekend brought a new improvement: a reinforced fence, an expanded porch, a garden that Sarah tended during breaks from her research position at the government facility 30 miles away. "Emma loves the sound of the leaves," Sarah had said that particular Sunday morning, holding their daughter on the porch swing as Ethan sipped his coffee. Ranger lay at their feet, alert even in repose, his ears occasionally twitching at distant sounds nobody else could hear. "She has your eyes," Ethan replied, reaching out to stroke his daughter's soft cheek. "And hopefully your brains too." Sarah's smile had faded slightly. "Ethan, we need to talk about what I found yesterday." Ranger sat up suddenly, sensing the change in tone. Ethan's hand unconsciously moved toward the kitchen drawer where he kept his service pistol, a habit he hadn't broken since Afghanistan. "It's about the Caldwell contracts," Sarah continued, her voice dropping. "The ones I wasn't supposed to see. They're using my research for something that violates every ethical standard we have." Victor Caldwell headed the private security firm that had taken over management of several government research divisions, including Sarah's. A former military officer with connections in Washington, he had a reputation for efficiency and ruthlessness. "How bad?" Ethan asked, soldier mode engaged. "Bad enough that people would kill to keep it quiet." Sarah held Emma closer. "I've gathered evidence, but if I go through official channels, it'll disappear, and so might we." That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah showed Ethan what she'd found: documentation of illegal human experimentation using compounds her team had developed for therapeutic purposes. The signatures at the bottom of the authorization forms included names from the highest levels of government. "We need to get this to someone who can make it public," Ethan said, his military training kicking in as he began mentally preparing for what needed to happen. "But they'll be watching you now." The decision to run came at dawn. Sarah had worked through the night, copying files, gathering physical evidence. Ethan had packed essentials, withdrawn their savings in cash from 3 different ATMs, and prepared the emergency kit he'd hoped never to use. "We'll head west," he told Sarah as they loaded the car before sunrise. "I have contacts who can help us disappear until the evidence is safe." Ranger sat in the back seat next to Emma's car seat, his training evident in his perfect stillness despite the tension. Sarah had tied a special bandana around his neck, something Ethan recognized from Ranger's military days, a signal that the dog was on duty. "Dog. Remember his command phrase?" Sarah reminded Ethan. "If anything happens—" "It won't," Ethan interrupted, unwilling to consider the worst. They drove for 2 days, staying at small motels under false names, paying cash, switching license plates with abandoned vehicles in parking lots. Ethan's military training served them well, but both knew they were being pursued. Twice they spotted the same black SUV 3 cars back. Once, a drone hummed overhead as they changed Emma in a rest stop bathroom. The safe house in Nevada had belonged to one of Ethan's Army buddies, now deceased, who had shared Ethan's paranoia about government overreach. Remote, off-grid, and unknown to anyone connected to their normal lives. It should have been perfect. For 4 days, it was. Then Sarah spotted the dust cloud on the horizon while hanging laundry. "They found us," she said, rushing inside where Ethan was feeding Emma. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "We have less than 20 minutes." Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, gathering their emergency bags while Sarah prepared Emma. Ranger watched attentively, sensing the change in his human's behavior. "We can't outrun them in the car," Ethan said, checking his weapon. "They'll have air support." Sarah nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. "We split up. They'll expect us to stay together." "No." Ethan's response was immediate. "We stay together. Think." "Ethan." Sarah placed her hand on his chest. "One target or two, which gives Emma a better chance." The soldier in him knew she was right, but the husband couldn't bear it. "I can protect you both. And I can protect our daughter by giving them something else to chase." Sarah was already writing on a small card, which she then pinned to Emma's blanket. "You take the evidence. I'll create a diversion." "Sarah, remember when we trained Ranger for emergency protocols?" Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "This is why." The dog's ears perked up at his name. Sarah knelt beside him, placing her palm against his muzzle. "You know what to do, boy. Protect Emma. Find the light in the desert." Ethan looked confused. "What light? The gas station." Sarah explained quickly. "The one with the old sheriff. He's the only one we've met out here who might help without asking questions." She pressed something small into Ethan's hand. "Put this in Ranger's collar. If we don't make it, someone needs to know what Caldwell is doing." The sound of vehicles growing closer forced their final decisions. Sarah would take their car and head east, drawing away the main pursuit. Ethan would go on foot with Emma and Ranger, heading southwest toward a ravine system he'd scouted earlier. Their last embrace was brief, a lifetime of love compressed into seconds. "I'll find you," Ethan promised. "I know," Sarah whispered, kissing Emma's forehead one final time. "Ranger, guard," she commanded, and the German shepherd moved immediately to Emma's side. What happened next came in flashes of chaos, Sarah driving away, dust billowing behind her, Ethan, with Emma strapped to his chest and Ranger at his side, making for the ravine. The sound of helicopters approaching. Gunfire. Shouting voices. Then the ambush men waiting in the ravine, anticipating their escape route. Ethan firing back. Ranger attacking one assailant, tearing at the man's arm. A bullet grazing Ethan's side. Blood. Emma crying. "Ranger, protect Emma. Emergency protocol." Ethan shouted the command they'd practiced but never expected to use. The German shepherd immediately responded, gently taking the handle of the special carrier now containing Emma. "Go," Ethan ordered, providing covering fire as Ranger disappeared into the brush with the crying infant. The last thing Ranger saw as he ran was Ethan, surrounded, fighting with the desperation of a father buying time for his child's escape. The dog's training overrode his instinct to stay and fight alongside his master. His mission now was Emma and the light in the desert that Sarah had described. For 2 days, the injured German shepherd traveled, hiding during daylight, carrying the increasingly distressed infant by night. His military training guided his path across the harsh landscape. A bullet wound in his shoulder slowed him, but never stopped his relentless progress. Emma cried, then whimpered, then grew frighteningly quiet as dehydration set in. when the neon lights of Desert Horizon gas station finally appeared through the swirling sand. Ranger summoned his last reserves of strength, his vision blurred, his legs trembling with exhaustion. He focused on the silhouette of the man in the doorway, their final hope in a world gone dark. Mason carried the whimpering infant inside, the bloodied German shepherd struggling to follow despite its injuries. Years of emergency medical training from his sheriff days kicked in as he assessed the situation. The baby Emma was dehydrated and feverish, but otherwise unharmed. The dog's condition was far worse: gunshot wound to the shoulder, deep lacerations on its flank, paw pads raw and bleeding. "Easy, boy," Mason murmured as he laid the infant on his cot and filled a shallow bowl with water. Ranger collapsed beside the makeshift bed, his eyes never leaving Emma, despite his obvious pain. The note pinned to Emma's blanket contained just 8 words, but they hit Mason like a physical blow. "Trust no one. They've found us. Medicine in collar." Beneath the note was a small photo: Ethan and Sarah Blackwood standing beside this very gas station 8 months ago. On the back, hastily scrawled, "Mason Reynolds, Jake's old partner, Jake Blackwood." A name Mason hadn't allowed himself to think about in nearly 15 years. His former partner on the force, killed during a drug bust gone wrong, Jake, who had a son named Ethan who'd joined the military right after the funeral. Mason's hands trembled as he examined Ranger's collar, finding a small zippered pocket containing a tiny vial of clear liquid and another note. "Emma needs 0.5 ml every 12 hours. Condition worsens without it." "What have you gotten yourself into, son?" Mason whispered, remembering Jake's smile in his son Ethan. A quick examination confirmed Mason's worst fears. Emma was already showing signs of withdrawal. Whatever medication this was, she needed it soon. Using a medicine dropper from his first aid kit, Mason carefully administered the dose, then turned his attention to the grievously wounded dog. "You've done your job, soldier," he told Ranger as he began cleaning the wounds. "Rest now." The dog's eyes, though clouded with pain, remained fixed on his charge. Only when Mason placed the sleeping infant directly beside him did Ranger finally lower his head, allowing the old lawman to extract the bullet from his shoulder. As Mason worked, his mind raced through the implications. If Ethan was Jake's son, that made Mason something like family. But the warning, "Trust no one," suggested a threat beyond ordinary criminals. Something that made a military-trained man send his wounded dog and infant daughter alone into the desert rather than risk normal channels of help. The bullet he extracted from Ranger's shoulder increased Mason's unease. It wasn't standard ammunition, it was the kind used by specialized government tactical teams. Mason had seen it only once before, during a joint operation with federal agents. Whatever Ethan and Sarah were running from had serious resources and authority. Mason's gas station sat at a crossroads of sorts, physically and metaphorically. 60 miles from the nearest town in any direction, it had once been a stagecoach stop, then a Prohibition-era smuggling waypoint. The building's history had left it with certain features Mason had appreciated when he bought it: reinforced walls, a basement cellar with tunnel access to a nearby ridge, and most importantly, multiple escape routes. After bandaging Ranger's wounds and setting up an IV drip of fluids for Emma using supplies from his emergency medical kit, Mason turned to his old ham radio, his connection to the outside world when cell service failed, which was often. "Donna, you reading me?" he called, using the private channel he shared with Sheriff Wallace. Static answered him for long minutes before a familiar voice broke through. "Mason, it's nearly midnight. What's wrong?" Donna Wallace had been a rookie when Mason was sheriff. Now she wore the badge he'd once carried, and despite his reclusiveness, she remained one of the few people he trusted, though tonight, even that trust felt tenuous. "Need information, not intervention," Mason said carefully. "Any reports of a missing infant, or a couple named Blackwood?" The silence that followed stretched too long. When Donna's voice returned, it carried a new tension. "Mason, where are you getting this information?" "Just answer the question." Donna, another pause. "There's a federal advisory, family of 3, considered armed and dangerous, connected to theft of classified material, father is ex-military, and the mother, government researcher." "Mason, what do you know?" He ignored her question. "Who issued the advisory?" "Department of Homeland Security, but it's being pushed hard by a private contractor, Caldwell Security." Mason's blood ran cold. Victor Caldwell had been implicated in Jake Blackwood's death 15 years ago, though nothing was ever proven. The connection couldn't be coincidence. "Donna, listen carefully. I need you to—" A sound outside cut him off the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel. At 3 in the morning, in the middle of a sandstorm, nobody should be pulling into Desert Horizon. "Someone's here," Mason whispered into the radio. "Stand by." Killing the lights, he moved to the window. A black SUV with tinted windows had parked by the pumps, its headlights still on, engine running. 2 men emerged, dressed in tactical gear despite the civilian vehicle. One carried what looked like a tracking device. Mason's hand moved to the shotgun he kept beneath the counter. Ranger, despite his injuries, had risen to a protective stance beside Emma, a low growl emanating from his throat. The men approached the gas station door, flashlights sweeping the darkened interior. Mason remained perfectly still, years of law enforcement experience keeping him invisible in the shadows. After trying the locked door, they conferred briefly before returning to their vehicle and driving away, but not before Mason caught a glimpse of the Caldwell Security logo on one man's jacket. "They're looking for them," Mason told Donna when he returned to the radio. "And they've got tracking equipment." "Mason," Donna's voice was deadly serious now, "if these are federal fugitives, you need to report this immediately." "You know as well as I do that Jake Blackwood was set up," Mason replied, "and Caldwell was behind it. Now his son's in trouble with the same people. That's not coincidence." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need 24 hours, no reports, no advisories. If I'm wrong, I'll turn myself in for obstruction." The silence stretched so long Mason thought he'd lost her. Finally, 24 hours, Mason, then I come to you, official capacity. And God help you if you're harboring fugitives for the wrong reasons." The radio went silent. Mason checked on Emma, still sleeping peacefully now that the medication had taken effect. Ranger watched him with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess his trustworthiness. "I knew your master's father," Mason told the dog quietly. "He was a good man. Died trying to expose corruption." He ran a hand over his weathered face. "History's got a nasty way of repeating itself." A whimper from Emma drew his attention. The infant's fever was rising despite the medication. Whatever condition she had, it was serious, and Mason had limited supplies to treat it. As dawn broke, Mason made a thorough inspection of Ranger's collar, finding something he'd missed in the initial chaos, a small microchip sewn into the lining. Using his ancient computer, he managed to access the chip's contents' GPS coordinates, dated just 3 days ago, pinpointing a location about 12 miles southeast of the gas station. "Is that where they are, boy?" Mason asked. Ranger's ears pricked forward at his tone. "Your family." The dog's response was immediate, rising painfully to his feet, moving toward the door, then looking back expectantly. "You can't go back out there," Mason told him. "You'll bleed to death before you make half a mile." Ranger barked once, insistently. Something clicked in Mason's mind. They're alive. Ethan's alive. The dog barked again, more urgently. Mason felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. Taking in a wounded dog and sick infant was one thing, actively searching for federal fugitives was quite another. He'd built this quiet life specifically to avoid such complications. The smart play was to wait for Donna, turn over what he knew, and let the system work. But the system had failed Jake Blackwood, and that bullet in Ranger's shoulder told Mason this wasn't about justice, it was about silencing people. The microchip had contained one more item, a video file. Mason watched as Sarah Blackwood's face filled his computer screen, her expression tense but determined. "If you're seeing this, we've been separated," she said. "The evidence against Caldwell is in Ethan's possession. He needs to get it to Senator Catherine Wheeler. She's the only one with enough power and integrity to ensure it reaches the public." Sarah looked away briefly, emotion threatening her composure. "Whoever finds this, please help my family. Emma has a rare metabolic disorder. Without her medication, she'll suffer seizures within 36 hours, organ failure within 48. The formula is specialized, only available through my lab." The video ended abruptly. Mason checked his watch based on the dog's condition and Emma's symptoms. They'd been traveling at least 2 days. That meant they had less than a day before Emma's condition became critical. "A ticking clock," Mason muttered. "Just what we needed." Outside, the sandstorm had finally subsided, revealing the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. Somewhere out there, Ethan Blackwood was either hiding, captured, or dead. His wife's whereabouts were unknown, and powerful people with government backing were searching for them. Mason looked down at Ranger, who stared back with unwavering determination despite his wounds. Then at Emma, innocent and vulnerable on his cot. "All right," he told the dog, reaching for his old sheriff's badge in the drawer where it had lain untouched for years. "Let's go find your family." Mason's preparation was methodical. The routine of a man who'd spent decades anticipating trouble. He secured the gas station, covering windows with metal shutters designed to withstand desert storms or gunfire. From a locked cabinet came supplies unseen for years, body armor worn thin but serviceable, ammunition for the shotgun and his old service pistol, communications equipment more reliable than the ham radio. "Can't leave you here alone," Mason told Emma as he fashioned a makeshift carrier from an old backpack, padded with clean towels. The infant's fever had stabilized with the medication, but her tiny body felt too fragile against his weathered hands. "And you're not exactly travel-ready," he added to Ranger, who stood shakily beside the cot, determination overriding injury. The dog's intelligence continued to impress Mason. While preparing, he'd laid out a map of the surrounding desert on the floor. Without prompting, Ranger had placed his paw directly on the area matching the coordinates from the microchip. "Military trained, aren't you?" Mason murmured. "Probably cost more than my whole property." Before leaving, Mason made one final call to Donna, instructing her to meet him at sunset at Juniper Ridge, a landmark roughly halfway between the coordinates and the gas station. Then he disabled the radio, preventing anyone from tracking its signal. Mason's ancient Jeep coughed to life reluctantly. With Emma secured in her improvised carrier on the passenger seat and Ranger in the back, they set out across the desert, avoiding the main road in favor of old service tracks Mason had used for decades. The morning sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape, offering scant cover from aerial observation. "Your daddy must be something special," Mason told the sleeping infant. "For your mom to trust him with evidence against people like Caldwell." He glanced at his rearview mirror, where dust trails followed their progress. "Hope he's worth finding alive." 20 minutes into their journey, Ranger suddenly grew alert, ears forward, a low growl building in his throat. Mason slowed the Jeep, scanning the horizon. Nothing visible. But years in law enforcement had taught him to trust an animal's instincts over human perception. "What is it?" "Boy," he asked, reaching for his binoculars. The drone was nearly invisible against the blue sky, a small black speck circling about a mile ahead. Surveillance. Mason immediately turned the Jeep toward a narrow wash between rocky outcroppings. The dry riverbed offered cover from aerial observation, though it meant a longer route to their destination. "They're thorough," he muttered. "Government resources for a private security firm. What the hell did your parents find?" "Emma." The next hour passed in tense silence as Mason navigated the challenging terrain, constantly checking for pursuers. Ranger, despite his injuries, remained vigilant, occasionally whimpering when they veered too far from what he apparently considered the correct route. The coordinates led them to the base of a rocky escarpment, seemingly featureless save for scattered desert scrub and weathered boulders. Mason parked the Jeep in the shadow of a large rock formation and surveyed the area through his binoculars. "Nothing," he said, frustrated. "No sign of anyone." Ranger, however, was now fully alert, straining against his injuries to exit the vehicle. When Mason opened the door, the dog limped purposefully toward a particular cluster of boulders, looking back expectantly. "Lead on, then," Mason said, securing Emma against his chest in her carrier. The hidden entrance was masterfully concealed a narrow gap between rocks that opened into a small cave. Without Ranger's guidance, Mason would never have found it. Inside, evidence of recent occupation was immediately apparent: a bedroll, empty water containers, bloodied bandages. "Ethan," Mason called softly. "I'm Mason Reynolds. I've got your daughter." Silence answered him, but Ranger moved deeper into the cave, nose to the ground. The dog stopped at what appeared to be a solid rock wall, pawing insistently. Another hidden section. Mason examined the wall carefully, finding a nearly invisible seam. Clever boy. The false wall, actually a lightweight composite made to resemble stone, moved aside to reveal a second chamber. And there, collapsed against the far wall, was Ethan Blackwood. The young man's condition was dire gunshot wound to the leg. badly infected, fever raging. His eyes fluttered open at their entrance, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Ranger," he whispered hoarsely. Then, seeing the bundle against Mason's chest, "Emma." Tears filled his eyes. "You found her? Sarah said you would." "She's safe," Mason confirmed, kneeling beside him. "Needs her medicine, but she's holding on. What about you? Can you move?" Ethan tried to sit up straighter, grimacing in pain. "Not far. Infection's bad. Thought I could make it to your station once I'd thrown them off our trail, but—" He gestured weakly at his leg. "You know who I am?" Mason asked, surprised. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's fever-flushed face. "Dad's old partner. He told me if everything went to hell, find Mason Reynolds, the only honest cop he ever knew." The words struck Mason like physical blows. Jake had trusted him, even after Mason had failed to protect him. "Your father was a good man," Mason said, throat tight. "I owe him. Now let's get you out of here before Caldwell's people find this place." Ethan grabbed Mason's arm with surprising strength. "The evidence. Have to secure it first." He nodded toward a small waterproof case partially hidden beneath the bedroll. "Everything's there. Financial records, experiment documentation, names. It's why they're hunting us." Mason took the case, opening it briefly to confirm its contents. Flash drives, paper documents, photographs, evidence that had cost at least one life already. Maybe more. "Sarah?" he asked, dreading the answer. Pain that had nothing to do with physical wounds crossed Ethan's face. "Created a diversion so we could escape. Last transmission I got 3 days ago said she was still free. After that, nothing." Helping Ethan to his feet was a struggle, the younger man barely conscious from fever and blood loss. Ranger led the way back to the jeep, constantly pausing to ensure they followed, exhibiting an almost human concern for his injured master. "Good boy," Ethan murmured as Mason helped him into the back seat. "Best damn dog in the world." "Save your strength," Mason advised, checking Emma, who had begun to fuss. "We need to get you both medical attention, and I've got limited supplies back at the station." The return journey was slower, Mason forced to avoid rough terrain that might worsen Ethan's condition. Twice they stopped to administer more medication to Emma, whose fussing had developed a concerning edge. Once, they pulled off their route entirely as another drone passed overhead. "They're searching grid patterns," Ethan observed, momentarily lucid. "Standard tactical procedure for fugitive recovery." Mason nodded grimly. "Your wife's message said Senator Wheeler was your contact. Only person with enough clout to protect us and get the evidence public," Ethan confirmed. "Sarah trusted her." "Wheeler's office is in Carson City," Mason said. "That's 8 hours from here in good conditions." "We won't make it," Ethan stated flatly. "Not with Emma's condition and Caldwell's people watching the roads. We need another way." Mason fell silent, considering options. The situation felt eerily familiar, an echo of the circumstances that had led to Jake Blackwood's death 15 years earlier. Back then, Mason had followed protocol, called for backup through official channels. That decision had cost Jake his life when their supposed backup turned out to be on a drug lord's payroll. "There's a meeting point," he finally said. Sheriff Wallace is meeting us at Juniper Ridge at sunset. If anyone local can be trusted, it's Donna." Ethan's expression remained skeptical. "Caldwell has people everywhere. Government contracts give him access to law enforcement databases, personnel files." "Donna was like a daughter to me," Mason insisted. "Trained her myself." "My father trusted his partner too," Ethan replied quietly. The words hung between them, uncomfortable but necessary. Trust had become a luxury neither could afford. They reached the gas station shortly after noon, the desert heat at its most punishing. Mason helped Ethan inside, settling him on the cot where Emma had slept earlier. The evidence case went into an old floor safe hidden beneath the register, a relic from the station's days as a prohibition waypoint. "Why did they target your family?" Mason asked as he cleaned and dressed Ethan's infected wound. "Why not just fire your wife? Discredit her?" Ethan winced as antiseptic hit raw flesh. Sarah wasn't just any researcher. Her work on metabolic disorders led to breakthroughs in biochemical compounds that regulate human systems. Emma's condition, that's why Sarah specialized in that field. And Caldwell weaponized her research, Mason guessed. Ethan nodded. Turned therapeutic compounds into something that could control people or kill them untraceably. When Sarah discovered unauthorized applications, she gathered evidence. Thought going through proper channels would protect us. His bitter laugh turned into a cough. Naive. Ranger had settled protectively beside Emma's makeshift bassinet, his wounded body curled around her as if creating a living shield. Despite his own injuries, the dog's attention remained fixed on the infant, occasionally nuzzling her when she fussed. "That dog saved both your lives," Mason observed, preparing antibiotics from his emergency medical supply. "Ranger was my spotter in Afghanistan," Ethan explained, his voice softening. "Best military working dog in our unit. When I was discharged after getting wounded, pulling strings to adopt him was the only favor I ever asked." His eyes grew distant. "He took a bullet for me over there. 2. Mason administered the antibiotics, knowing they were insufficient for the severity of the infection. "Your leg needs proper medical attention, and Emma needs specialized care beyond what I can provide. We just need to hold out until we can reach Senator Wheeler," Ethan insisted. "Once the evidence goes public, Caldwell loses his protection. Then we can surface." The sound of an approaching vehicle cut their conversation short. Mason moved quickly to the window, pistol drawn. Relief washed over him as he recognized Sheriff Donna Wallace's patrol SUV. "It's Donna," he told Ethan. "Earlier than planned, but that's good." Ethan struggled to sit up. "Ranger, guard Emma," he commanded. The dog immediately positioned himself between the infant and the door, despite his injuries. Mason stepped outside, raising a hand in greeting as Donna exited her vehicle. She was alone, her expression grave beneath her department-issue Stetson. "You're early," Mason called. "Thought it best," she replied, approaching cautiously. Her hand rested near her sidearm, not drawing it, but prepared. "Mason, I need you to be straight with me. Is Ethan Blackwood in there?" Mason hesitated only briefly. "Yes, with his daughter. Both need medical attention." Donna's eyes scanned the station exterior, assessing. "The advisory's been upgraded. Federal agents are swarming Elko County. Roadblocks on every major highway. They're saying the Blackwoods stole classified defense materials." "It's not what you think," Mason began. "I'm not here officially," Donna interrupted. "No backup. No call-in, just me, trying to understand why the most honest man I know is harboring federal fugitives. Relief flooded through Mason. You need to hear their side. Donna, it's connected to what happened to Jake. Her expression shifted subtly. Jake Blackwood, your old partner. Ethan is Jake's son. This goes back 15 years. Corruption we tried to expose. History repeating itself. Donna studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Show me. Inside, Ethan had managed to sit up. Ranger still positioned protectively near Emma. The young man's fever-bright eyes assessed Donna with military precision. Sheriff, he acknowledged cautiously. Mr. Blackwood, she returned. I understand you're in a difficult situation. That's one way to put it, he replied. Over the next hour, Ethan explained everything Sarah's research, the discovery of its weaponization, the evidence they'd gathered, and their desperate flight across 3 states. Mason added context about Jake Blackwood's death, the corruption investigation that had been mysteriously shut down, and Victor Caldwell's involvement in both cases. Donna listened without interruption, her trained investigator's mind visibly processing each piece of information. When they finished, she removed her hat, running fingers through her short-cropped hair. This is bigger than anything our department can handle, she finally said. But I believe you, and I want to help. We need to get this evidence to Senator Wheeler, Ethan said, and find Sarah, if she's still alive. Direct contact with Wheeler is too risky right now, Donna advised. Every conventional communication channel will be monitored, but I might have an alternative. She turned to Mason. Remember Tom Willis, retired FBI, moved out to Cedar Ridge last year? Mason nodded slowly. Witness protection specialist. Keeps to himself. He owes me a favor, Donna said. And he still has contacts in the Bureau, ones he trusts implicitly. People outside Caldwell's influence. That's a lot of faith to put in someone I've never met, Ethan said skeptically. You put your faith in Mason. Donna pointed out. And I'm putting mine in you. Trust works both ways. Mr. Blackwood. A small sound from Emma drew everyone's attention. The infant had begun trembling slightly, her previously calm features contorted in discomfort. The medication's wearing off, Ethan said urgently. She needs another dose. Mason moved quickly to administer the precious liquid from the vial, his weathered hands gentle with the tiny infant. How much is left? Donna asked. 2, maybe 3 doses. Mason answered grimly. Not enough. Donna's decision was immediate. I'll contact Tom, arrange a secure meeting point. He can get you clean transportation, medical assistance for Emma, and a direct line to Wheeler's office. And Sarah, Ethan asked, the name carrying a world of emotion. One step at a time, Donna advised. But I'll put out careful inquiries. As Donna prepared to leave, Mason walked her to her vehicle, out of Ethan's earshot. I'm putting a lot on the line here. Mason, she said quietly. My badge. Possibly my freedom. I know, he replied. But it's the right call. Like it was with Jake. Her question carried no accusation, only shared history. Mason looked away, the old guilt surfacing. I failed, Jake. Followed the rules instead of my instincts. Won't make that mistake again? Donna touched his arm briefly. "You're a good man. Mason Reynolds, always were." She glanced back at the station. "That little girl in there, she's lucky you're the light in the desert her mom sent them to find." After Donna's departure, Mason returned inside to find Ethan watching him with an unreadable expression. "You trust her completely?" the younger man asked. "With my life," Mason confirmed. "And now with yours." Ethan nodded slowly. "My father said the same about you. Right before his last mission." He shifted painfully. "Said Mason Reynolds was the one man who'd never break, never bend, never betray a trust." The words settled heavily on Mason's shoulders. "I failed your father. Ethan. Wasn't there when he needed me most. He never saw it that way." Ethan replied. "Said you were the one who tried to warn him. The system failed him, not you." Something long knotted in Mason's chest began to loosen at these words, a forgiveness he'd never expected to receive. The moment was interrupted by a sharp bark from Ranger. The dog was on his feet despite his injuries, staring intently at the window, hackles raised. Mason moved quickly to the security monitor he'd installed years ago, connected to hidden cameras around the property. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 black SUVs approaching from the main road, men in tactical gear deploying in standard formation, and emblazoned on their body armor, clearly visible even on the grainy footage Caldwell security. "They've found us," Mason said grimly, reaching for his shotgun. "And they're not here to make arrests." Mason's movements were precise, economy of motion born from years of tactical training. He secured the building's entrances, activating the reinforced shutters over windows and doors, a security system installed during his first paranoid months of isolation that now seemed prescient rather than excessive. "Can you shoot?" he asked Ethan, whose military bearing was evident despite his injuries. "Give me a weapon and a clear line of sight," Ethan responded, struggling to stand. "I'll manage." Mason handed him a 9mm handgun from the safe. 12 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. "It's clean." Outside, the Caldwell team was deploying with professional precision. 8 men total, spreading out to surround the small gas station. Their equipment was military-grade tactical vests, communications gear, and weapons that shouldn't be available to private security personnel. "They're not trying to hide anymore," Mason observed grimly. "No pretense of legal authority." Ethan positioned himself near a small viewport, weapon ready despite the fever that caused his hands to tremble slightly. "Caldwell knows what happens if we get that evidence out. He's desperate." Mason's mind raced through their limited options. The gas station's defensive features were considerable reinforced walls, limited access points, good visibility but designed to deter opportunistic criminals, not withstand a paramilitary assault. With Ethan injured, Emma vulnerable, and Ranger wounded, their mobility was severely compromised. "There's a tunnel," Mason said suddenly, moving to the storage room. "Prohibition-era smuggling route. Leads to a ridge about half a mile east. Previous owner showed me when I bought the place." He shifted a heavy storage cabinet, revealing a trap door set into the concrete floor. The hinges protested as he lifted it, revealing a narrow stairway descending into darkness. "When was the last time you used this?" Ethan asked skeptically. "I maintain it," Mason replied, grabbing emergency lights from a shelf. "Old habits," Never thought I'd actually need it. A amplified voice outside interrupted them. Attention inside. This is a federal security operation. You are harboring fugitives and stolen government property. You have 2 minutes to surrender before we enter forcibly. Mason snorted. Federal security operation. Convenient fiction. Ethan checked Emma, who had settled after her medication but remained worryingly pale. She can't be moved through a tunnel, not in her condition. And I'll slow you down. His expression hardened with soldier's resolve. Take Emma and the evidence. Ranger and I will create a diversion. Not happening, Mason said flatly. I didn't find you just to abandon you. It's not abandonment. It's tactical necessity. Ethan argued. Emma's survival comes first. The evidence second. Everything else is expendable. The radio on Mason's belt crackled to life, a channel only Donna knew. Her voice came through, tense but controlled. Mason, it's Donna. I'm approaching from the North Access Road. 3 minutes out. Situation. Caldwell's team is here, Mason replied. 8 armed men, tactical gear, surrounding the station. They're preparing to breach. Understood. I've contacted Tom. He's 20 minutes away with medical support. A pause. Can you hold that long? Mason exchanged glances with Ethan. We'll have to, he replied. Outside, the Caldwell team had moved to breach positions. 2 men approached the front door with a battering ram while others maintained covering positions. 1 minute remaining, the leader called. Mason made a rapid decision. Ethan, get Emma into the tunnel entrance, but stay put. Ranger, go with them. The dog hesitated until Ethan repeated the command, then limped protectively beside his master. I'm going to buy us some time. Moving to the front of the store, Mason positioned himself behind the reinforced counter. Attached to the underside was a control panel installed during his early renovations, wired to several defensive measures around the property. The first impact of the battering ram against the door reverberated through the building. The reinforced frame held, but wouldn't withstand many more such assaults. Mason pressed the first button. Outside, the men with the battering ram suddenly fell back, shouting in pain and surprise as the electrified door handle delivered a non-lethal but incapacitating shock. Simultaneously, the exterior lights previously off in the daylight blazed at maximum intensity, temporarily blinding those looking toward the building. That won't hold them long, Mason muttered, moving quickly back to the storage room where Ethan had positioned himself defensively at the top of the tunnel stairs. Emma secured in her carrier beside him. Nice trick, Ethan commented, eyes fever-bright but alert. Got a few more, Mason replied, checking his shotgun. But we need a real plan. Another impact shook the building. They'd abandoned the door in favor of a window, the reinforced shutter beginning to buckle under the assault. Breach in 30 seconds, Ethan estimated with professional calm. The radio crackled again. Mason, I can see the situation, Donna reported. I'm going to create a diversion from the north. When you hear it, be ready to move. Before Mason could respond, a tremendous explosion rocked the area. Through the security monitors, they watched as Donna's patrol SUV crashed through a barrier of fuel drums at the property's edge. The impact and resulting fire created an immediate crisis for the Caldwell team, several members breaking off the assault to address the new threat. That's our window, Mason said, grabbing Emma's carrier. Tunnel. Now. Ethan struggled to his feet, pain evident in every movement despite his determination. Ranger pressed against his leg, offering support that allowed the injured man to navigate the steep stairs into the tunnel. The passageway was narrow but navigable, reinforced with timber supports that had stood for nearly a century. Mason led with a powerful flashlight, Emma's carrier secured to his chest, while Ethan followed with Ranger's assistance. Their progress was painfully slow, each step an ordeal for the wounded soldier. "They'll find the tunnel entrance," Ethan said between labored breaths. "Standard search protocol." "Then we need to be far enough ahead when they do," Mason replied. Above them, muffled by earth and concrete, came the sounds of the Caldwell team breaching the building. Boots on floor, shouted commands. The methodical progression of a tactical sweep. They'd covered perhaps 200 yards when the first gunshots echoed down the tunnel, the assault team discovering their escape route. Pursuit would follow quickly. "Can't keep this pace," Ethan gasped, stumbling against the wall. His leg wound had reopened, blood soaking through the bandage. Mason made a split-second decision. "There's a side chamber ahead. Maintenance access point. We make our stand there." The chamber, when they reached it, was little more than a widened section of tunnel with an ancient ladder leading to a surface hatch. Mason positioned Ethan with Emma in the furthest corner, then took defensive position near the entrance. "Shotgun ready. If they get past me," he told Ethan, "the surface exit is your last option. It comes out under a rock overhang, provides some cover to the eastern ridge." Ethan checked his pistol grimly. "They won't get past you." Ranger, understanding the danger with uncanny intelligence, positioned himself protectively before Emma, his injured body still formidable in its determination. The first Caldwell operative appeared in the tunnel less than 2 minutes later, tactical light sweeping the darkness. Mason's shotgun roared in the confined space, the sound deafening, the blast catching the man in the chest. His body armor absorbed much of the impact, but the force threw him backward into his teammates. "Federal agents," a voice called out, "surrender immediately." "You're not federal agents," Mason shouted back. "And we're not surrendering." A brief firefight followed, the narrow tunnel working both for and against them. The confined space limited the attackers' ability to utilize their superior numbers, but each muzzle flash and report in the enclosed area was disorienting, the air quickly becoming acrid with gunpowder. Mason maintained disciplined fire, making each shotgun shell count. 2 attackers down, possibly a third wounded, but they were professionals, adapting quickly, using flashbang grenades to disorient before advancing. One such device skittered into their chamber. Mason kicked it back into the tunnel, but not before the disorienting flash temporarily blinded him. In that moment of vulnerability, a bullet found its mark, tearing through his left shoulder. Pain exploded through Mason's body, but decades of training kept his weapon up. His position held. Behind him, Emma began crying, the sound piercing through the gunfire. Running low on ammunition, he called to Ethan, voice tight with pain. "Same here," Ethan replied. 4 rounds left." The radio at Mason's belt suddenly crackled to life. "Mason?" Donna's voice. "Urgent. We're inside the station. Tom's with me. Where are you?" "Tunnel system," Mason managed between controlled breaths. "Maintenance chamber, about 250 yards in, under fire from Caldwell's team." "Hold position," she replied. "We're coming to you." Hope flared briefly. Then reality reasserted itself. Even if Donna and Tom were armed, they were outnumbered by the remaining Caldwell operatives, and time was running out both for their ammunition and for Emma's deteriorating condition. A new voice echoed down the tunnel. "Reynolds, I know you're there with Blackwood." The voice was cultured, authoritative. "This is Victor Caldwell. Let's discuss this situation rationally." Mason exchanged glances with Ethan, whose expression hardened at the name. "Like you discussed things with my father," Ethan called back, voice raw with emotion. A pause. "Ah, Jake Blackwood's boy. Yes, unfortunate business. That? Your father made the same mistake you're making, thinking evidence matters more than power." "We're not surrendering," Mason shouted. "And we're not negotiating." "I'm not asking for surrender," Caldwell replied smoothly. "Merely an exchange. The evidence for the formula to save your daughter. Mr. Blackwood, Emma needs specialized medication only we can provide." The offer hung in the air, poisonous in its temptation, in its... Mason looked at Ethan, saw the anguish on the younger man's face as he glanced at Emma. "He's lying," Mason said quietly. "Once they have the evidence, they have no reason to keep any of us alive." Ethan nodded, though the decision visibly tore at him. "I know." "You're running out of time," Caldwell called, "both tactically and medically. Emma has what? Perhaps 12 hours before seizures begin? A bit longer before organ failure? Such suffering for one so young?" Before either man could respond, a new sound echoed through the tunnel gunfire, but from the direction of the gas station. Shouts of surprise, commands barked in confusion. "Donna?" Mason realized. "She's hitting them from behind." The distraction provided a critical opportunity. Mason, despite his wounded shoulder, maintained cover fire while Ethan prepared for a possible retreat up the maintenance ladder. Ranger, sensing the shift in strategy, positioned himself to assist his injured master. The firefight in the tunnel intensified, but now the Caldwell team was caught between two forces, their tactical advantage neutralized. Through the chaos came a familiar voice. "Mason, Ethan, hold your fire. We're coming in." Seconds later, Sheriff Donna Wallace appeared at the chamber entrance, accompanied by an older man with the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. Behind them, the remaining Caldwell operatives were either subdued or retreating. "Tom Willis." The man introduced himself briskly, assessing the situation with professional efficiency. "Former FBI. Let's get you people out of here before reinforcements arrive." "Caldwell?" Mason asked, allowing Donna to examine his shoulder wound. "Gone," she replied grimly. "Slipped away when we breached. But we've got 3 of his men in custody." Tom knelt beside Emma, checking her condition with practiced hands. "This child needs immediate medical attention. I have a helicopter waiting at the ridge point." "The evidence," Ethan began. "Secure," Mason assured him, revealing the waterproof case still strapped to his body beneath his shirt. "Never left my possession." As they prepared to move, a final violent exchange erupted in the tunnel. One of the downed Caldwell operatives, not fully incapacitated, raised his weapon toward the group. Before anyone could react, Ranger launched himself from a protective stance, colliding with the attacker in a blur of fur and desperate courage. The gun discharged once, the sound thunderous in the confined space. Ranger's body absorbed the impact meant for Ethan. the loyal dog's final act of protection for his human family. "No," Ethan cried out as Donna neutralized the threat with 2 precise shots. The German Shepherd lay motionless on the tunnel floor, blood spreading beneath his powerful form, his eyes fixed on his master with unwavering devotion, even as the light within them began to fade. Ethan crawled to Ranger's side, his own injuries forgotten in the face of this new, unbearable loss. The German Shepherd's breathing came in shallow pants, blood pooling beneath his loyal body. 3 wounds now, the original bullet to the shoulder, the injuries sustained during his desert journey with Emma, and now this final, devastating shot to his chest. "Stay with me, boy," Ethan pleaded, cradling the dog's massive head in his trembling hands. "Not like this. Not after everything." Mason knelt beside them, his own wounded shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat. In his decades of law enforcement, he'd seen good men die, had held partners as they took their final breaths. The sight of this dog, this extraordinary animal who had saved an infant's life through sheer determination and loyalty, struck him with equal force. "We need to move," Tom Willis urged, though his voice had softened with understanding. "That helicopter is our only way out, and Caldwell will have reinforcements coming." Donna stood guard at the tunnel entrance, her expression grim but resolute. 5 minutes, she told Willis. "We can give them that." Ranger's intelligent eyes remained fixed on Ethan, a low whine escaping his throat as he tried to lift his head toward Emma's carrier. Even now, his training, his purpose remained foremost. "She's safe," Ethan assured him, voice breaking. "You did it. Ranger, you saved her." The dog seemed to understand, his tense body relaxing slightly as Mason carefully examined the wound. The old lawman's expression told Ethan everything he needed to know. "He's not going to make it." "Is he?" Ethan asked, though it wasn't really a question. Mason shook his head slowly. The bullets lodged near his heart, even with immediate veterinary care. The unspoken truth hung heavy between them. Ranger had perhaps minutes, not the hours it would take to reach proper medical facilities. Another sacrifice in a chain of sacrifices that had defined the past week. "He found me in Afghanistan," Ethan said suddenly, needing Mason to understand what they were losing. "Our unit was ambushed. I was separated, wounded. Search teams couldn't locate me in the mountains." His hand stroked the dog's fur with infinite gentleness. "Ranger broke away from his handler, went missing for 18 hours. They thought he'd been killed. Instead, he found me, led the rescue team to my position." Emma began to cry softly, as if sensing the grief surrounding her. At the sound, Ranger made a final, valiant effort to rise, his duty not yet complete in his loyal mind. "Easy, boy," Ethan soothed. "You've done enough. Rest now." The dog's eyes began to cloud, his breathing more labored. With what seemed like tremendous effort, he extended his paw toward Ethan in the trained gesture that had been part of their bond since the beginning. Ethan took the offered paw, holding it as he would a human hand. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered, with a final soft sigh. Ranger's body relaxed, the light fading from his eyes. His paw remained in Ethan's grasp, a last connection between soldier and the companion who had saved him twice over. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Tom Willis, clearly accustomed to high-pressure situations, allowed this brief space for grief. Emma's cries had subsided to whimpers, as if she too understood the gravity of the moment. "We need to go," Donna finally said, genuine regret in her voice. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded, military training reasserting itself through personal anguish. With Mason's help, he struggled to his feet, swaying slightly as fever and blood loss threatened his consciousness. "We can't leave him here," Ethan insisted, looking down at Ranger's still form. "We won't," Mason promised, then nodded to Tom. Together, the two older men gently lifted the German shepherd's body. Despite his injuries, Mason refused to relinquish his share of this burden. Their procession through the remainder of the tunnel was slow and solemn. Ethan carried Emma, his wounded leg threatening to buckle with each step, while Donna led the way, weapon ready. Behind them, Mason and Tom bore Ranger's body with the dignity afforded a fallen comrade. The maintenance ladder presented a nearly insurmountable challenge for Ethan in his weakened state. After several failed attempts, Tom took Emma's carrier, climbing first to secure their most vulnerable member. Donna followed, then helped pull Ethan through the hatch, the young father's determination overriding physical limitations when it came to reaching his daughter. Mason came last, having insisted on securing Ranger's body in a tarp found in the maintenance chamber. "We'll come back for him," he promised Ethan, "once you and Emma are safe." The desert sun was mercilessly bright after the tunnel's darkness. They emerged beneath a rocky overhang, just as Mason had described, with the eastern ridge visible about a quarter-mile across exposed terrain. In the distance, the silhouette of a helicopter was barely visible against the cloudless sky. "That's our extraction," Tom confirmed, checking Emma's vital signs with growing concern. "The pilot's a former medevac operator. He'll have emergency medical equipment on board." Emma's condition had deteriorated noticeably in the past hour. Her breathing had become irregular, her tiny body occasionally trembling with the precursors to the seizures Caldwell had mentioned. The medication from her last dose was wearing off, with nothing remaining to replace it. "How long to a hospital?" Ethan asked, his voice hollow with combined grief and fear. 30 minutes to the airfield, then another 15 by ground to a secure medical facility," Tom replied. "I've already transmitted the details of Emma's condition. They'll be prepared." Mason scanned the horizon, decades of tactical awareness alerting him to movement before the others noticed. "Vehicle approaching from the south," he warned. "Fast!" Donna raised her binoculars. "Black SUV. Same model as Caldwell's team." "Reinforcements," Tom concluded grimly. "We need to move. Now." The quarter-mile to the helicopter might as well have been 20 for Ethan. Each step sent waves of agony through his infected leg. The wound reopened and bleeding freely again. Mason supported him as best he could despite his own shoulder injury, both men running on nothing but willpower and adrenaline. "Almost there," Mason encouraged as they struggled across the uneven terrain. Ahead, the helicopter pilot had spotted them, rotors beginning to turn in preparation for immediate departure. Behind them, the SUV had reached the gas station, disgorging armed men who quickly discovered the tunnel entrance. It would be minutes, perhaps seconds, before they emerged from the maintenance hatch and spotted the fleeing group. "I can't," Ethan gasped, stumbling to one knee. "Take Emma. Leave me." "Not happening," Mason growled, hauling him upright with strength that belied his age and injuries. "Your daughter needs her father." Donna dropped back to provide covering fire as the first of their pursuers emerged from the tunnel. The exchange was brief but intense, bullets kicking up dust around their position. "Go!" she shouted to the others. "I'll hold them off." Tom had reached the helicopter with Emma, the pilot already assessing the infant's condition through the specialized medical training Mason had hoped for. But the distance between them and Ethan seemed insurmountable as more of Caldwell's men joined the pursuit. In that moment, staring at the helicopter that represented Emma's only chance at survival, Ethan made the decision only a parent could make. With the last of his strength, he pushed Mason away. "Get to Emma," he ordered. "The evidence is what matters now. It's what Sarah would want, what I want. Save our daughter." Before Mason could argue, Ethan had drawn his pistol with newfound steadiness, moving to join Donna in providing covering fire. His military training was evident in every movement as he took position behind a boulder, creating a defensive line between the pursuers and the helicopter. "Ethan," Mason called, torn between his promise to protect Jake Blackwood's son and the urgent need to get Emma to safety. "Go!" Ethan shouted back, his face set with the same determination Mason had once seen in Jake's expression. "This is my choice." A bullet struck the rock inches from Mason's head. The decision made for him. With a final nod of respect to Ethan, he turned and ran for the helicopter, clutching the evidence case that had cost so much already. Tom helped him aboard as the pilot increased power, preparing for immediate takeoff through the rising dust. Mason watched as Ethan and Donna maintained their position, buying precious seconds for the helicopter to clear the ground. As they lifted off, a new vehicle appeared on the horizon, not another black SUV, but a civilian truck driving with reckless speed directly toward the firefight. Even from the increasing altitude, Mason could make out the driver's silhouette, a woman with blonde hair. "Sarah," he whispered, understanding dawning as the helicopter banked sharply away from the scene. She had survived, somehow found them, and was now driving straight into danger to reach her husband and create yet another diversion. Emma gave a sudden, frightening jerk in Tom's arms, her first actual seizure beginning. The former FBI agent immediately administered emergency anti-seizure medication from the helicopter's medical kit, his movements precise but urgent. "Will she make it?" Mason asked, his voice barely audible above the rotor noise. Tom's expression was grim but determined. "If we get her to the facility in time, if they have the proper medication formulation." Two impossibly large ifs upon which a tiny life now depended. As the helicopter raced toward the horizon, Mason looked back one final time at the diminishing figures below Ethan fighting despite his wounds. Donna holding the line, Sarah driving into the heart of danger, and Ranger's body left behind in the tunnel. An entire family fragmented by one man's corruption and greed. "Hold on, little one," he told Emma, gently touching her trembling hand. "Your mom and dad are still fighting, and so will we." The helicopter cut through the Nevada sky with desperate urgency, its pilot pushing the machine to its operational limits. Inside, Tom Willis had transformed the small cabin into an improvised medical unit. Emma's tiny form connected to portable monitoring equipment that beeped with concerning irregularity. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," Tom reported, his calm voice belying the gravity of the situation. "The emergency medication is helping with the seizures, but her metabolic system is decompensating." Mason cradled his wounded shoulder, the adrenaline that had carried him through the firefight now fading, leaving behind waves of throbbing pain. "How much longer to the medical facility?" 22 minutes, the pilot called back. "I've radioed ahead. They're preparing for immediate intervention." 22 minutes. Mason had seen enough medical emergencies during his years as sheriff to know that could be 22 minutes too long. Emma's color had taken on a grayish tinge, her breathing shallow and labored. Each tiny whimper tore at something deep in Mason's chest. "She needs her mother's medication," he said, frustration evident in his voice. Whatever Caldwell did with Sarah's research, Tom's expression shifted subtly. "The specialized formula. Tell me exactly what you know about it." Mason recounted what Ethan had shared: Sarah's breakthrough research on metabolic disorders, specifically developed to treat their daughter's rare condition, later weaponized by Caldwell for unknown purposes. Tom was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Emma's monitors. Then he reached for a secure satellite phone. "This is Willis," he said when his call connected. "Authorization code Sierra Tango 943. I need an immediate connection to Director Levine, Special Research Division." Mason watched with growing confusion as Tom engaged in a terse, technical conversation, using medical terminology that meant nothing to him. When he disconnected, the former FBI agent's expression had changed completely. 3 months ago, Tom explained, the FBI's Special Research Division intercepted communications about a breakthrough metabolic compound being developed outside normal channels. They've been quietly investigating its origins. Sarah's research, Mason realized. Tom nodded. What they didn't know was the connection to Caldwell, or that the original purpose was therapeutic. They've been treating it as a potential bioweapon. And, Mason prompted, sensing there was more. "And they've synthesized it," Tom said simply. "Reverse-engineered from samples they obtained. Director Levine has authorized emergency use for Emma, given the circumstances. They're preparing a dose now. Will meet us at the landing site." For the first time since the ordeal began, genuine hope flickered in Mason's chest. Will it work if it's reverse-engineered? It should be molecularly identical. Tom replied, "Whether it's enough to reverse her current deterioration?" He left the sentence unfinished, his attention returning to the monitors. The remainder of the flight passed in tense silence, broken only by Emma's occasional whimpers and the steady rhythm of the monitoring equipment. Mason found himself speaking softly to the infant, promises that her parents were alive, that she would see them again, that everything would be all right. Promises he had no authority to make but felt compelled to offer nonetheless. When they finally touched down at a small private airfield, a medical team was waiting, led by a tall woman in a lab coat who identified herself as Dr. Catherine Levine, FBI Special Research Division. "The child's critical," she announced after a quick assessment, already administering a clear solution through a tiny IV in Emma's arm. "We need to move her to the secure facility immediately." Mason struggled to his feet, determined to stay with Emma. "I'm going with her." Dr. Levine barely glanced at him. "You need medical attention yourself, Mr. Reynolds, and we need to debrief you about the evidence you're carrying." "The evidence can wait," Mason insisted. "I promised Ethan I'd stay with his daughter." Tom placed a restraining hand on Mason's arm. "Let the medical team do their job. Emma's in the best possible hands now." His voice lowered. "And we need to talk about what happens next, about what's in that case." The truth of Tom's words penetrated Mason's exhaustion. The evidence was the reason for everything that had happened: Caldwell's pursuit, the Blackwood separation, Ranger's sacrifice. It needed to reach Senator Wheeler as intended. "Fine," Mason conceded. "But I want regular updates on her condition." As Emma was transferred to a waiting ambulance, Mason allowed himself to be guided to a second vehicle. His last glimpse of the infant showed a medical team working with controlled urgency. Dr. Levine personally monitoring the IV delivering Sarah's formula to her tiny patient. The secure facility turned out to be a nondescript medical building on the outskirts of Carson City, its ordinary appearance belying the armed security and sophisticated surveillance systems. Mason's shoulder was treated by a taciturn doctor who asked no questions about the bullet wound, while Tom arranged secure communications in an adjacent room. "Senator Wheeler is on her way," Tom informed him after an hour of phone calls and encrypted messages. "She'll be here within 2 hours. In the meantime, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning." For the third time in 24 hours, Mason recounted the extraordinary chain of events: Ranger's arrival at the gas station, the discovery of Ethan in the cave, the connection to Jake Blackwood's death 15 years earlier, and Caldwell's apparent corruption of Sarah's research. Tom listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Mason finished, he sat back with a thoughtful expression. "There's something you should know," he said finally, "about Sarah Blackwood." Mason tensed, fearing the worst. "Is she alive?" Tom confirmed quickly. "And much more than just a researcher caught in an ethical dilemma." He pulled a secure tablet from his briefcase, entering multiple passwords before turning the screen toward Mason. On it was a personnel file with Sarah's photograph, but with a designation that made no sense. Special Asset, Counterintelligence Division, FBI. "I don't understand," Mason said, studying the file in confusion. "Sarah Blackwood has been working with a specialized FBI unit for the past 18 months, Tom explained. When she discovered her research was being redirected for unauthorized purposes, she didn't just gather evidence, she contacted us." "She's an informant?" Mason asked, trying to reconcile this with everything Ethan had told him. Tom shook his head. "More than that, a fully embedded agent. Her apparent flight with Ethan was a controlled operation designed to expose Caldwell's entire network. The separation at the safe house was planned. She created a diversion while Ethan took what appeared to be all the evidence, but she carried the most damaging material herself." Ethan didn't know, Mason realized, the implications dawning on him. His fear, his desperation, it was all real. "Operational security," Tom confirmed grimly. Sarah couldn't risk Ethan behaving differently if they were captured and interrogated. His reactions needed to be genuine. "She used her own husband, her own child." Mason felt a surge of anger on Ethan's behalf. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," Tom said, his expression troubled. "There was a detailed extraction plan. But something went wrong. Caldwell's team moved faster than anticipated, with resources we didn't know he had. The operation fractured, and Emma was risking her daughter's life, part of this controlled operation. Mason's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Tom's eyes reflected genuine regret. Emma's medication was supposed to stay with her. Sarah had arranged multiple backup supplies. But when everything went sideways, he shook his head. Sarah has been trying to reach Ethan for days, working through back channels while continuing to gather evidence against Caldwell. The truck we saw, Mason realized. That was Sarah coming for them. Yes. Our operational team lost contact with her 12 hours ago when she went off protocol to find her family. Mason absorbed this information, his perception of events shifting dramatically. Does Caldwell know she's FBI? We don't think so. He believes she's simply a whistleblower. If he knew the full extent of the operation... Tom didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Before Mason could respond, the door opened and a doctor entered with an update on Emma. The medication was working her vital signs, stabilizing, the seizures controlled, but she remained in critical condition, requiring constant monitoring and further doses of the synthesized formula. "Can I see her?" Mason asked. The doctor nodded. Briefly. She's in pediatric intensive care. Emma lay in a specialized medical crib, surrounded by monitoring equipment and IV lines. Her color had improved slightly, but she looked impossibly small and vulnerable amid the medical technology. Mason stood beside her, gently touching her tiny hand with his weathered finger. "You're tougher than you look," he told her softly. "Just like your mom, apparently." A commotion in the hallway drew his attention. Raised voices, rapid footsteps approaching. Mason tensed, moving protectively toward Emma, but relaxed when Tom appeared in the doorway. "We've got them," Tom announced, his normally composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine emotion. "All three of them?" "Ethan, Donna, Sarah?" Mason asked, scarcely believing it possible. Tom nodded. "Wounded, but alive. They're being transported here now." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Mason refused to leave Emma's side until her parents arrived, maintaining his vigil despite doctors' suggestions that he rest. When the door finally opened again, he turned to see Ethan Blackwood being wheeled into the room on a gurney, his leg professionally bandaged, IV fluids running into his arm. "Emma," Ethan whispered, reaching toward his daughter with desperate relief. The medical staff positioned his gurney beside her crib, allowing him to touch her for the first time in days. "She's going to be okay," Mason told him. "The medication is working." Ethan's eyes, clouded with pain medication but still alert, found Mason's. "Sarah, is she?" "Here," came a voice from the doorway. Sarah Blackwood stood supported by a nurse, her face bruised, arm in a sling, but very much alive. The reunion that followed husband, wife, and child together again after their ordeal was too raw, too private for Mason to witness comfortably. He stepped back, intending to leave the family to their reunion. "Stay," Sarah said, noticing his withdrawal. "Please." Her eyes held knowledge, intelligence, and something Mason hadn't expected: guilt. "You could have told him," Mason said quietly, nodding toward Ethan. "I couldn't," she replied simply. "The risk was too great. If Caldwell had captured either of us—" "You sent them to me," Mason realized. The light in the desert? You knew who I was from the beginning? Sarah nodded. Jake Blackwood's former partner. The one he trusted above all others. I did my research. Before Mason could respond, Senator Catherine Wheeler arrived, accompanied by Tom and a security detail. The distinguished older woman took in the scene with practiced political assessment, her gaze finally settling on the evidence case still secured to Mason's side. I understand you have something that could end Victor Caldwell's career, she said without preamble. More than his career, Sarah replied, straightening despite her injuries. Evidence of illegal human experimentation, misappropriation of government resources, conspiracy, attempted murder, and connection to the death of Jake Blackwood 15 years ago. At the mention of Jake, Mason felt something shift inside him, a weight he'd carried for 15 years, the belief that he had somehow failed his partner. Now, with Jake's son and grandchild safe, with the possibility of justice finally within reach, that weight began to lighten. There's something else you should know, Sarah continued, looking directly at Mason. The truck that followed us to your gas station yesterday morning. What about it? Mason asked, confused. It wasn't Caldwell's people, she said softly. It was Ranger. He found us first, led us to you before returning to Emma. That's how I knew where to look. The revelation struck Mason like a physical blow. The loyal dog had not only rescued Emma, but had sought out her parents as well, completing his mission even as his wounded body failed him. He always completed his mission, Ethan said, voice breaking with pride and grief. Always. Senator Wheeler cleared her throat, bringing focus back to the immediate situation. I need to see this evidence immediately. If it's as comprehensive as you suggest, we'll need to move quickly before Caldwell can further cover his tracks. As the senator, Tom, and Sarah began discussing next steps, Mason found himself standing beside Emma's crib, Ethan reaching out to grasp his hand in wordless gratitude. What happens now? Mason asked quietly. Justice, Ethan replied simply. For everyone Caldwell has hurt, for Ranger, for my father. For the first time in 15 years, Mason allowed himself to believe that might actually be possible. 1 month later, Mason Reynolds stood on the weathered porch of Desert Horizon gas station, watching the sun sink toward the western horizon in a blaze of orange and crimson. The familiar view remained unchanged, but everything else had transformed beyond recognition. Where once stood a lonely outpost maintained by a solitary man, there now existed something Mason had never expected to find again a home. The past 4 weeks had unfolded with the intensity of a desert flash flood, reshaping the landscape of his life with unstoppable force. Victor Caldwell's arrest had made national headlines, the evidence provided by Sarah and Ethan proving more than sufficient to bring charges of corruption, conspiracy, illegal human experimentation, and attempted murder. The revelation of his connection to Jake Blackwood's death 15 years earlier had reopened that case as well, with promising indications that justice long delayed might finally be served. More surprising to Mason had been Senator Wheeler's personal involvement in the aftermath. She had not only championed the case against Caldwell, but had taken a special interest in Emma's medical care, ensuring the child received the best possible treatment for her rare condition. Sarah's research, reclaimed from Caldwell's misuse, was now being properly developed for its original therapeutic purpose, with Emma as its first official patient. The sound of laughter drew Mason's attention to the side yard, where Ethan sat in a reclining chair, his injured leg still in a cast but healing well. Beside him, Sarah cradled Emma, whose bright eyes and healthy color bore little resemblance to the critically ill infant Mason had first encountered. The family had been staying at Desert Horizon during their recovery, initially out of necessity but increasingly by choice. "Dinner's almost ready," Mason called to them, still unaccustomed to sharing his space, his routines, his life with others. "We'll be right in," Sarah replied, smiling in a way that transformed her serious face. The dedicated FBI agent had taken family leave, her focus now entirely on healing and rebuilding with Ethan and Emma. Mason returned inside to check on the pot of venison stew simmering on the stove, his mother's recipe. Unused for decades until now. The old gas station's living quarters had proven surprisingly adaptable to family life. The storeroom had become a nursery for Emma, while Ethan and Sarah occupied Mason's bedroom, Mason himself taking the pull-out couch in what they now called the living room. The doorbell rang another change, as the gas station had never needed one before. Mason opened the door to find Sheriff Donna Wallace, her uniform exchanged for casual clothes, a bottle of wine in one hand. "Thought I'd stop by," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Their relationship had evolved dramatically since the Caldwell incident, the shared experience breaking down barriers Mason had maintained for years. "Just in time," he replied, accepting the wine. "Stew's almost ready." Donna glanced around the transformed space family photos now adorning walls that had been bare for decades, toys scattered across what had been an immaculately ordered floor. The general cheerful disorder of family life. "Suits you," she observed with a knowing smile. "It's temporary," Mason insisted, though with decreasing conviction each time he said it. The sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through the window, Mason recognized Tom Willis's government-issue sedan pulling alongside Donna's personal truck. The former FBI agent had become a regular visitor, ostensibly to check on Sarah and update them on the Caldwell case, though Mason suspected his interest in Donna might be an equally compelling reason. As everyone gathered around the expanded dining table, a recent purchase to accommodate their growing circle, Mason found himself in the unfamiliar position of host, server, and center of a makeshift family. The conversation flowed easily. Updates on Emma's improving health, Ethan's physical therapy progress, developments in the case against Caldwell. They've recovered Jake's original case files, Tom informed them, his professional demeanor softening in the informal setting. "The evidence corroborates everything we suspected. Caldwell was directly involved in the ambush that killed him." Mason set down his fork, emotions he'd long suppressed rising to the surface. "Jake deserved better." "He's getting justice now," Ethan said quietly, reaching across to grasp Mason's shoulder briefly. "Dad would be grateful for that." After dinner, as twilight deepened into night, they moved to the porch. The desert air had cooled, stars emerging in brilliant clarity against the darkening sky. Emma had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, peaceful in a way that still seemed miraculous given how close they'd come to losing her. "I received a job offer today," Ethan mentioned during a lull in conversation. "Security consultant for Senator Wheeler's committee. Once my leg heals." "You're taking it?" Mason asked. trying to ignore the unexpected pang the thought of their departure caused him. Ethan and Sarah exchanged glances, a silent communication born of shared trauma and deeper connection. "Actually," Sarah began, "we've been talking about staying in Nevada. The medical team monitoring Emma believes the desert climate is beneficial for her condition." She hesitated. "And we've grown attached to this place." Mason absorbed this information, uncertain how to respond. For 15 years, he had cultivated solitude, convinced it was all he deserved, all he wanted. Now, the prospect of returning to that existence felt hollow in a way he hadn't anticipated. "There's plenty of room," he found himself saying. "Property's bigger than I need, always has been." The offer hung in the night air, unexpected, but somehow inevitable. Donna smiled knowingly, having witnessed Mason's slow transformation from recluse to reluctant patriarch. Before anyone could respond, a sound captured their attention, the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle. In the remote location of Desert Horizon, unexpected visitors after dark remained cause for caution. Old habits not entirely abandoned despite recent events. The headlights resolved into a familiar Park Service truck, pulling up beside the other vehicles. The young ranger who emerged carried something carefully wrapped in a blanket. "Mr. Reynolds," he called, approaching the porch. "Sheriff Wallace said I'd find you here. We, have something that belongs to the Blackwoods." He gently placed the bundle on the porch, unwrapping it to reveal a polished wooden box with a simple brass plate. "Ranger, hero, protector, friend. We found him where you said," the ranger explained softly. "Thought he deserved to come home." Ethan rose painfully from his chair, moving to kneel beside the box containing the remains of his faithful companion. Sarah joined him, Emma still sleeping against her shoulder, the family united in quiet grief and gratitude. Mason stepped back, giving them space, but Ethan reached out, grasping his wrist. "You're part of this too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Part of us now." As Mason joined the small circle gathered around Ranger's memorial, he felt the final pieces of his carefully constructed isolation crumbling away. In its place stood something he had never thought to find again: purpose, connection, family. "We'll bury him tomorrow," Mason said, looking out over the desert landscape now silvered by moonlight. "On the ridge behind the station. He'll be able to watch over all of us from there." The simple ceremony the following morning would mark not just a farewell to a faithful companion, but the beginning of something new at Desert Horizon, a gas station transformed into a home, a collection of wounded souls forged into a family, and an old lawman's redemption found in the most unexpected way through an injured dog carrying a crying baby to his doorstep on a stormy desert night in our twilight years. We often wonder if our legacy will fade like desert footprints after a windstorm. The story of Mason Reynolds reminds us that second chances arrive in unexpected ways, sometimes in the form of a wounded German shepherd carrying a precious child to our doorstep. Like Mason, many of us have built walls around past regrets, convinced that solitude is our deserved companion. We've experienced losses that hollowed us, responsibilities we believe we failed, and retreated to our own desert outpost. But life has a way of finding us, even in our most isolated moments. When that loyal dog collapsed at Mason's feet, it wasn't just Emma he was saving, it was Mason himself. Through protecting others, we often find our own redemption. Through opening doors we long kept shut, we discover family where we least expected it. As we stand on our own porches watching sunsets that seem to arrive earlier each year, remember that it's never too late to transform a lonely gas station into a home filled with laughter, to honor promises made decades ago, or to find purpose again in protecting those who need us. The desert may seem barren, but beneath the surface, life waits patiently for the courage to bloom.